Hey BYU, from a Sun Devil fan, did we just become best friends?
You are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Richie Bradshaw, and I will be your guide for everything Arizona State Sun Devils. Shout out my everydayers who are here every day, and thanks to all of you for making us your first lesson of the day. BYU fans and ASU fans are oddly united in quite a few things as this rivalry develops for ASU. Why are we not playing each other in football every year? What does tonight's basketball game look like between ASU and BYU? Does ASU have a chance? And, I mean, why on earth are ASU fans and BYU fans united together against Arizona fans? Well, if you're not in the loop, you should probably do that. But I am here to sit down in a Locked On Sun Devils crossover edition of the show with Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars, Locked On BYU Cougars, if you will. ASU and BYU have a history with each other going back to the days of your grandfather watching football. But I'll tell you what, a rivalry was reborn this past year. And yet, Arizona State is not the biggest enemies to BYU right now. Me and Jake are going to sit down. We're going to talk about why ASU, BYU, and some other regions need to have an annual schedule against each other. We're going to talk about ASU versus BYU in basketball and why ASU fans are definitively better than U of A fans. All of that is coming up here on this crossover edition of Locked On Sun Devils and Locked On Cougars with Jake Hatch. I'm going to pass it over, and I'll check you guys out next time. If you did not listen to today's earlier episode, catching you up on the basketball drama, make that your second listen of the day. Till next time, you keep it locked right here on Locked On Sun Devils. Jake Hatch, take it away.
Essentially, anybody who's anybody wants this to happen. What is it? We're talking about on a crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Sun Devils.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Everybody, I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. That across from me digitally is Richie Bradshaw, host of Locked On Sun Devils. Of course, we are your daily podcast covering the BYU Cougars and the ASU Sun Devils every single day. So thank you for making it your first listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who like to call our everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. New customers get up to $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. Go to FanDuel.com today to get started. All right, Richie Bradshaw, what in the heck is Brett Yormark thinking? We had one of the games of the year between ASU and BYU a season ago. I know that the Big 12 had that schedule matrix still that has like the next 4 years of schedules laid out, but they couldn't make an exception and get ASU and BYU back on the docket in 2025.
Dude, it's the thing that kills me about the move to the Big 12 is in the Pac-12, RIP, we had established rivalries.
Mm-hmm.
Like ASU, Arizona was one of the big ones, sure. But you had USC, UCLA. You had Oregon and Washington. You had Oregon and Oregon State, Washington State, Stanford and Cal. Like we had established rivalries and everything. We get to the Big 12, and there's not really too many. Like there's some good ones. Iowa State, Kansas State, BYU, Utah, which needs to be an annual thing. I'm hoping that continues to be the case. But the other thing that really bothers me is that with the rivalries, there's still not a rivalry week, but that's a whole other thing. But ASU, BYU, not just one of the best games in the Big 12 last year, one of the best games in the nation last year, one of the most controversial games that we had last season with the entire debacle of, hey, students, please get off the field, and they're too drunk to realize what is going on. And it was a mess, but we established in that game a rivalry with BYU. And the old heads, can go back to the days of the WAC when ASU and BYU were rivals. So like everything is set up here for this to be an annual kind of rivalry. It's not yet. Hopefully it will be. But the problem, like you said, is you're coming off of a season where these two teams finished first place and third place in the conference and had a fantastic game against each other. Majority of both teams are returning, and you don't schedule them with the least amount of disrespect intended here. I would much rather play BYU than Houston. That's all I'm saying. With no disrespect to Houston, I would appreciate BYU on there.
Parker Ainsworth's on line 1 all of a sudden with his 5-hour energy and wants a word.
Well, you know what? He can talk about basketball right now. He just has no football to talk about.
Parker hosts Locked On Cougs, covering the Houston Cougars, a good friend of ours. But I think you make a very good point, Richie, is that they should have made an exception here because it's one of those games that BYU is going to open Big 12 play in Boulder against Colorado. Obviously, that's a rematch of the Alamo Bowl, which is a really, really highly thought of game. 8 million people watched it. It was the highest watched non-playoff bowl game this past season. Okay, why couldn't you get BYU ASU and take Houston off the schedule or arrange it somehow to get BYU ASU on the schedule in Provo, because that would be a ratings bonanza. You could get high marks from the TV partners if that were on the docket. It feels like it would have been easy fix, but I guess in the long run, the hope now is that we'll see BYU ASU playing for all the marbles in Arlington.
Yep, and I love that you said in Provo. It needs to be in Provo. Like, we just got the host. That's great. I would love to host you every time, but for this rivalry to develop, and especially after year 1, year 2 needs to go back to your guys' backyard, and then let's just keep going. That's the way it should have been. So, it's unfortunate.
The other thing I was going to add is that I was a proponent when ASU, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado joined the Big 12 and created this Western wing with BYU in the conference. I was an advocate for the Arizona schools and obviously BYU and Utah. I thought they should have been essentially, it's not protected rivals, but they should have had protected games where they literally played every single year. That allows for those regional rivalries to develop. Colorado could also be in the mix, but they're across the Rockies, so you may lump them in with the Kansas States, the Oklahoma States in that realm. But you build regional rivalries in a league that, as you already mentioned, don't have too many of them. We do have Farmageddon. We do have the Holy War. You guys got the Territorial Cup down there in Arizona. And those are the few protected rivalries in this league. You need to develop more of them, and you're right. ASU and BYU are off to a really, really good start, but to see it go on the back burner for at least 1 year, that's a big-time miss.
I love that you mentioned regional rivalries because we don't have that anymore. All of the conference realignment has ruined some of that stuff. And it is what it is. It's not going away, so we got to accept it. That's fine. I also understand, and I am on board with getting rid of divisions within conferences because I feel like your top 2 teams should go, not just the winner of the Big 12 East and the Big 12 West, but the regional rivalries are still important. That was one of the things that helped ASU establish rivalries with Colorado and Utah when they were in the Big 12 because they played them every year. And that should be something that is still taken into account, even if you don't have a West and East division or North and South or anything like that. So I love that you bringing back regionality into this, because in 10 years from now, like, the next generation of college football fans aren't going to realize how important having regional rivalries used to be for the sport. Instead, like, just an example, maybe Cal and Wake Forest. Let's just go totally crazy. Cal and Wake Forest end up being the powerhouses of the ACC, and it's like, that's so cool. That's like a great rivalry and everything. And then me and you were like, they never used to play each other. And they don't understand. It's like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it just meant more back then.
Well, and I can insert that my grandfather, who was a big-time BYU fan, you talk about those old heads that remember BYU and ASU in the WAC. When Arizona and Arizona State came into the Big 12, he was ecstatic, remembering back to the 60s and 70s when ASU and BYU and Arizona, they would all do battle in the WAC. And he talked often of all of that. And that's the thing that we need to get back to. And I'm hoping at some point with the Big 12 scheduling, I know this matrix is in effect for the next next few seasons. Maybe beyond that, they reevaluate and go to where, hey, we're going to have BYU go to Arizona and host Arizona. It's going to go back and forth every single year. They'll spend one game at least down there in Arizona. The other one will come to Utah. And you do the same thing with the Utes. And I think it would be the right way to build those regional rivalries and allow the Big 12 to start to develop where you have some of those Midwest battles that grow up, the Texases, the UCF, all that can grow up over time. Because as you mentioned, 10 years from now, it's going to be a wholly different look to all things college football.
Yep. We may not even have conferences at that point, but, that's a whole other conversation that our good friend Spencer McLaughlin talks about all the time on Locked On College Football. Yep. But hear me out. Here's how we get the Utah teams and the Arizona teams to have the most exciting schedule release every year for the Big 12. It's protecting those state games. So ASU plays BYU, Utah every year, and vice versa for all the teams, and you swap the home games and everything. Yeah. You continue to have Territorial Cup at the end of the year, and you move the Holy War to the end of the year. And now what you're doing for these 4 schools is you have established 3 rivalries, which already are there, by the way. They're already there. They're present. The foundation is laid. You just got to build them back up. And then I'm sure BYU fans and I'm sure Utah fans forever have wanted Holy War to be the last week of the year. And for the rest of the Big 12, build up your rivalries there. Make Farmageddon last week of the year. Make Baylor, Texas Tech last game of the year. Like, there's potential here to have these in-conference rivalries that can really build up. But for me, to get ASU, U of A, Utah, and BYU fans most excited, like you said, have those games protected. I love that you pointed that out. That's one of the things that I would love to see the Big 12 really move forward and start instigating those kind of things. Make the Texas schools play each other every year, like no matter what. Like, it's just these little layups that are just so easy to do.
We'll try and slide this in front of Brett Yormark, and he can hear all of our wisdom and hopefully,
see you in Dallas, Brett.
Reevaluate a few things. All right, coming up next, we do need to talk about the big basketball game tonight down there in Tempe. BYU and ASU squaring off. Looking forward to this one. We will delve into that next as we continue on with this Locked On crossover edition right here between Locked On Cougars and Locked On Sun Devils. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel's here for you guys when it comes to the NBA, from the tip-off to where the game ends. There's no better place to get in on all the action with our friends over at FanDuel. They are America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can bet on you can place live bets throughout the game, and if you even missed the opening tip-off or want to place money on a potential fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you even combine your bets into a same-game parlay. Obviously, all of us want to cash in on this. The best part is whether you're tuning in late to a game, you can stay engaged all game long. And the best part is the app is super easy to use. And when you win, you get paid out instantly from our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today or check out the app. Once again, that's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Today's show was
It is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And if you want to take a look at the line for tonight, I am taking BYU to cover, whatever it is.
Well, okay, wow, interesting. So welcome back, Locked On Cougars, Locked On Sun Devils. You didn't bury the lead there, Richie. You mentioned the fact that you think that these two programs are going to do battle. You think BYU is going to run roughshod. Now, I think the biggest thing with BYU basketball right now is they're coming off a very impressive week. They're now ranked 25th in the country after they upset Arizona in controversial fashion. We'll get to that momentarily. But also just absolutely demolished Kansas. Now, it's kind of an opposite story for ASU. BYU and ASU opened the Big 12 season way back in December. It feels like it was a lifetime ago that they last played. And it's a completely different look for ASU, especially some of the circumstances they find themselves in the past week. BJ Freeman, no longer on the roster. Jaden Quaintance, am I saying his name correct? The big man?
Yep, Jaden Quaintance, you got it.
He left their last game on crutches, leaving the arena. So, Richie, you said you're going to take ASU plus whatever number. Why? Like, what's the thought process here?
This has been an ASU basketball team that has found themselves in games more often than not before they find ways to blow it.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at ASU's game against Iowa State, you will see that ASU lost that game by 15 or 17 points. Within the first 34 minutes of that game, it was less than a 10-point lead for either team. And ASU had led at some point in time.
Okay.
Last 4 minutes, everything fell apart. You look at that game, you go, they got their butt kicked, and it's like, for 34 minutes, they were right there. And Iowa State was number 3 at the time. And they've had several other games that they should have won. They went to double overtime against Texas Tech. They had another overtime game. I think it was UCF. If not, UCF was like a 5-point game. Like, ASU was in these games, but they find ways to lose. And this is a team that just lacks consistency right now. And some of the guys who you look at as your top scorers, if you look in the stat box, there's been games where they're non-existent. And then there's guys who are averaging 5 points a game that are on fire. Amir Ali, who I definitely want to bring up here in a minute, is someone that is really heating up right now, and he's becoming one of your most pivotal players. But that wasn't the case at one point in time. But BJ Freeman dismissed from the team. There is a whole lot to unpack there, and we do not have the time to go through all of that. But that's a whole thing. Jaden Quaintance, he's been banged up throughout the year. What I will tell you about him is he's someone like, I'm good to go, coach. I can play. And it's like, Jaden, you're literally in a boot. You cannot play. And he's like, I can play, coach. I promise. I'll just play under the rim. And it's like, it's hard to keep him off the court.
Okay.
If he plays, I guess I wouldn't be shocked, but I would be shocked because you leave a game on crutches. There's no way you're playing. But you're talking about losing 2 starters that you had when they played BYU last time, and they lost that game. So maybe the power of friendship can come through and they can beat BYU, but I don't like their odds right now.
Okay, I think you bring up a good point there. I got like Jaden Quaintance. The image I have in my mind, you've obviously probably seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Is he the knight? Tis a flesh wound. It sounds like this is that. It sounds like that situation for him. But
I'll bite your ankles.
Yeah, but I give him credit if he's trying to battle back from that. But you're right. When he leaves the arena on crutches, you're going to be hard pressed to get back into action in due order. Okay, so you mentioned the BJ Freeman situation. So without him on the roster, he is the leading scorer on the season for ASU. Who amongst, you mentioned Amir Ali, who is going to step up and fill that scoring role for the Sun Devils down the stretch here?
Recently, it has been Amir. And over the last 10 games, he's averaging double-digit points. I took a look today, or I should say yesterday. We're recording the show on a Tuesday night. He is shooting 50% from the field. He is 90+% from the free throw line, somewhere in the 40% from deep. Like, he's shooting so well right now. And he's someone that isn't really afraid to shoot it from anywhere on the court. There was a point in time where he would line up and go and shoot, and I'm like, what are you doing, man? And the last 5 games, it's like, put the ball in number 5's hands, and you feel good. But it's been the guy who runs the point recently in Aulston Mason who has come alive, and he's been about as streaky as they come. There was a point in time where he was averaging right at 10 points a game. And don't get me wrong, he's not averaging 15 or anything, but outside of this past game against Kansas State, he has been one of the leading contributors for this team. He has multiple 20-point games over the last 5 to 6 games. He has been able to really just produce, and he can shoot from all over the field. This is the way that ASU has to win games moving forward, is Amir Ali, who is around 25 minutes a game over the last 5 games. And I would expect that gets bigger. And then Aulston Mason, who is averaging about 38 minutes a game, if you can believe that. I love Adam Miller. I'm waiting for Joson Sannon to get healthy again. But to win this game, I need to see Amir Ali and Aulston Mason going off. Who does ASU need to worry about? From my understanding, it sounds like BYU is thinner going into this game.
Yeah, so the biggest question for BYU is, they're trying to keep guys obviously healthy, but they've gone to a very deep rotation. We're talking 11 guys in multiple games recently, Richie, and that includes the win over Arizona, includes the curb stomping of Kansas. They're playing 11 guys right now, and that has allowed BYU to keep guys relatively fresh. But I'll tell you, the one name ASU fans, they'll probably remember him from that first matchup, but he has come into his own, and he looks like he may be an all Big 12 first-team honoree, is Richie Saunders. It's incredible. Yeah, you're right. And by the way, Richie spells it the exact same way you do, Richie. So
good. No T. That T is a red flag.
Yeah. So there you go. But the bigger thing is he has been absolute dynamite, and he is just Mr. Consistent. He's going out there. And when BYU needs a guy to go and get a tough bucket, obviously he had the foul call that was controversial at the end of the Arizona game, makes the 2 free throws to win it. But he essentially is the guy that you put the team on your back when you need to, and he'll go get you a bucket. The other thing is, it's not just him. Jaeger Demon, the star freshman. You got Dallin Hall. You've had guys like Keba Keita. You've had 2 recent introductions to the lineup in Mihailo Boskovic and Trey Stewart, who have all contributed in big moments in multiple games. So it's kind of you think about it, it's Richie Saunders leading this team, but they can bring multiple other guys from all angles at you, and that's got to be a concern for ASU. Now, I will insert one other name before I throw it back to you, and that's Cannon Catchings. Obviously, he's another one of those freshmen that was considered to be maybe a one-and-doner for BYU. When he goes over 10 points, Richie, BYU this season, 8-1. So he's kind of the barometer for BYU in some of these games. If he scores double digits, BYU more often than not is going to win games.
There you go. I'm going to ask you a quick question, and then I'm going to give my response.
Okay.
How big are you guys, and how good are you at rebounding?
Okay, here's the thing. BYU's not the biggest team. Their starting center, Keba Keita, is generously listed at 6'9". He may be 6'8", but The thing is, they've got really good length, and they rebound as a unit. Every guy on the court will go after rebounds, and that's been a big reason why BYU more often than not has been able to win the rebounding battle in a lot of these games, and it's been a critical cog for generating extra looks for them offensively, because this is a team that likes to hoist up threes with reckless abandon. So getting those extra possessions via offensive rebounds have been critical for BYU, and despite being a pretty small team height-wise, they've been pretty darn good at rebounding the basketball.
Small ball is the way that ASU has been the last few years, and it's led to a team that is not a good rebounding team. I would assume it's less than 5 times this year that ASU has won the rebounding battle. If there was a prop bet for who's going to rebound more, I would throw a couple of mortgage payments on BYU. Really any team. There's going to be 1 week I lose, and the remainder of the games I'm going to be making some serious money. ASU has added size compared to what they were last year, because last year your leading rebounder was 6'1". That's how frustrating it was. But there is one guy that BYU needs to be aware of, and it's the lone 7-footer on this team, Sean Phillips Jr., who is seeing a much bigger role recently. And this was before, keep in mind, this was before Jaden Quaintance got injured. He was starting to get around 20 minutes a game as someone who was your 7th or 8th guy. He's going to start in place of Quaintance, and he plays very ferocious. There was a point in time where I would sit there and I'm like, you are a 7-footer and you're playing so soft. You need to fix that. And he must have heard me, because now he is not afraid to play off the glass. He is slamming stuff down. He's a decent shooter. I've seen him make a few little mid-range jumpers, nothing too crazy, but he is going to be one of the biggest factors in this game as well. I need Amir Ali and I need Aulston Mason to score points. And I need, if Sean Phillips gets a double-double in this game, I will feel really good about the chances for ASU to come out and potentially get a win. You got guys like Bashir Jihad, who could be a really good contributor as well. He's so hit and miss. He's getting 15 or he's getting 5. There's no in between. But it's the 2 guards and it's Sean Phillips Jr. that will determine if ASU is going to win or lose this game.
Well, and that's been an issue for BYU. I'll just insert this real quick, that extra long big men, we're talking true 7-footers, they have given BYU's front court problems in multiple games. So that could be something to obviously monitor for both sides, and we'll see how it goes. If BYU can shoot like they did against Arizona on Saturday night, the Cougars can pile up the points in a hurry, but once again, it's another road game. It's a road environment. Now, we all know that there's a lot of members of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints down there in the Valley who I'm sure will be representing.
Should be a home court advantage, dude.
Watching this game. But that brings me to an interesting thing. Now, Arizona got themselves in a bit of hot water with their fan base. Let's just say acting inappropriately on Saturday night. Richie,
you're too polite.
You've got some insight as to why ASU is undoubtedly the better fan base on that side of the rivalry, and we'll get to that next right here on this crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Sun Devils. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Sun Devils your first listen of the day. Richie Bradshaw from Locked On Sun Devils there. I'm Jake Hatch from Locked On Cougars. All right, so Richie, Saturday night, after a controversial finish in the Arizona game, Arizona student section and other fans in the stands started chanting F the Mormons. Now, this has been a bit of an issue over the past few seasons. We had Oregon's football at the Oregon football game in 2021. It was chanted by the Oregon student section. USC's football team, their fans, chanted at BYU in 2022, if I recall correctly. We had Providence earlier this season do it to BYU. So it's been kind of an ongoing issue here for BYU, and it's prompted outcry from multiple sides, not just BYU side of things. Our good friend Drake Toll did a really good piece, I thought, on Locked On Big 12 talking about it. But you and I were talking off air just the other day, and you mentioned the fact that even though ASU maybe had some plans to do this, cooler heads and smarter people prevailed. Can you lend some insight and let Cougar fans know why ASU fans actually might be their friend?
Well, obviously there is a rivalry that is developing between ASU and BYU. You hop on Twitter, you're going to see these fan bases constantly battling, and there's swear words that are thrown around, right? And there's certain people that don't care about those things. It's just right, wrong, or indifferent. Some people don't have an issue saying some things. But when you get that group mentality, that I won't call it a mob mentality because I think that's taking it to an extreme, but when you've got so many people that are collectively thinking the same thing and shouting it, and with anger too, like, that's not okay. And it's not okay for anything really. Like, it's not just Latter-day Saints. It can't be for any other religion or any other race or anything like that. That's not an okay thing to do. Like, it's sports. At some point in time, we need to lay down a line. This was something everyone was really, really worried about when BYU came to visit Arizona State. This was something that we had heard whispers about, was that the ASU student section was going to chant exactly that, F the Mormons.
Okay.
And people started getting wind of it. And ASU accounts, ASU fans, and even what we call the 942 crew, who represents the student section, got ahead of Barstool. Their Barstool Tempe page got ahead of it, and they said, we're not doing this. This is absolutely not okay. Like, not only is it not okay for doing that to BYU, but also realize how many of the Latter-day Saints are in the Valley that you could very easily upset. And then for what it's worth, like, Sam Levitt, your starting quarterback, is of the Jesus Christ Church of Latter-day Saints. It's like, that's not what we should be representing. So yeah, I'm sure there were more than a few ASU fans that were still chanting that, but we were able to really get into everyone's heads of like, hey, you got to think bigger picture. This is not cool. This is not what we're about. Yeah. We can't do this.
Well, and that's the thing. I think any Cougar fan watching this is going to be actually applauding ASU for, as you mentioned, getting ahead of it and saying, no, we're nipping this right now in the bud. This is not going to happen on our watch. And that I think BYU fans can appreciate. And as you mentioned, there is a hearty population of LDS folks down there in the Valley. My sister-in-law grew up in Gilbert, of all places. So I know that there's going to be a lot of BYU fans in attendance at this game. You mentioned the fact it's not mob mentality. I call it the herd mentality, like where you're kind of
perfect.
You're in the middle of the group and you're like, hey, I'm just going along with the flow. I get all that, but you're right. There are protected classes and just groups of people you just don't do that against. But I think that BYU fans hearing that, knowing that ASU and multiple sides said we're not going to do that. And as you mentioned, Sam Levitt, he is a member of the church. And the funny thing about the Arizona deal is they have Addison Arnold, who's on the roster, who's a member of the faith. One of their senior associate ADs is also a member. So
their quarterback is, what is it, the nephew of Coach Sataki?
Yeah. So
No Fafita?
No Fafita, yeah. So there's connections all over the place on this. So you look at it, and it didn't need to happen. I hope it doesn't happen going forward anymore. I hope that the national outcry will just end it at some point. But I guess speaking for BYU fans, hey, thank you, ASU, for being as upstanding as y'all are. And I think you may have earned a Cougar fan's respect by saying that.
And I hope that is the case, because for the collective amount of ASU fan bases and accounts, aggregate accounts and media members, and even just a college student who has 50 followers, for them to come out and put on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, like, hey, do not do this. We're not about this. This is not okay. I'm really glad they were able to get ahead of it. And like to the point that a Barstool account is doing it, because right, wrong, or indifferent, Barstool has an image that they put out there. And it's not an image that is popular, I suppose, but for them to come out and they're like, yeah, we're not doing this, that hopefully paints a picture of the way that ASU was looking at this situation and understanding there are some bad eggs in here. And there's bad eggs in every fan base. There's bad eggs in U of A, in BYU, in Utah, but you need the core of your fan base to be able to step up and decide when something is wrong. And again, it's a sport. Yeah. Like, we love sports. Me and you, Jake, we live and breathe sports. This is our job to sit here and talk about BYU sports and Arizona State sports. But at the end of the day, you have to draw a line, and a hard line in the sand. And it should be when you get to responses, shouts, chanting, that get to that point of what U of A was doing. I appreciate, I don't remember if it was the athletic director or somebody higher up with U of A staff for their athletic department came out and issued an apology. I have not seen anything from anybody else. That's
I will say, so the Zona Zoo, I think is what it is. It's their student section. They did put out a statement, and their statement, by the way, was even better than Desiree Reed Francois, who's the AD statement, because they actually dug into the crux of the matter and said, hey, we don't do this. This is something we can't ever do again. Because funny thing about this is Richie, in 2006, the same thing happened with Arizona fans. So it's a two-time deal with Arizona. Now that's 20 years almost separated between the two incidences. But hey, you're right. It is sports, and I like to call it sports hate. There's a different thing between sports hate and actual hate, and there's a pretty hard line that was crossed there. But nonetheless, big ups to ASU fans. I'm speaking on behalf of BYU and Cougar Nation out here. Really do appreciate that. That's actually really a stand-up thing, because very easily could have been like, yeah, you know what, just do your thing. And that I think BYU fans, and as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, for the vast majority of BYU fans, I think they can appreciate the fact that ASU did what they did.
Yeah, and I mean, ASU fans are rowdy. There's a ton of bars that are right next to the stadium on the infamous Mill Avenue. These kids are coming in inebriated, having a good time. It's not going to be easy to control them. And for them to be able to do that, and like, did you win the game? Sure. But BYU nearly won that game. And to the point where ASU students are on the field, literally on the field, because they stormed it. And I'm very happy that they didn't get the chance while they were on the field. I can't even imagine if you had F the Mormons chants and these kids are 20 feet behind you. That would have been awful. So I am very proud of our fan base, our student section, and all that stuff for being able to step up and not do that. But there's a line. Because you wouldn't chant this in public. So why are you doing it in a stadium?
Yep, no doubt about that. All right, Richie. Well, where can everybody find your fine work if they're a Cougar fan who wants to learn more about the Sun Devils?
Well, if for some reason you want to learn about my interesting football team, You can follow me at RichieBrads36. The podcast is available on all platforms, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, all that good stuff. Jake, where can my ASU fans find you if they would like to have a debate with you?
Jacob C. Hatch on X, aka Twitter. Reach out anytime. I love to interact with anybody. I'm dead serious about that. The bigger thing is if you want to check out all things BYU, check out Locked On Cougars. Like Richie said, YouTube, Apple Music, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, we are there. The Locked On Network has got us covered. But as Richie, as always good to catch up with you, my man.
It's always a pleasure just shooting stuff with you, Jake, whether that's on our Big 12 crossover episodes or the Big 12 squad or anything like that.
I'll leave you with this. I still owe you an explanation for the Provo push, but we'll hold that one for another day.
Yes. Nope. That we got to talk about that sometime. I want to know.
We will do that. But once again, thank you for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Sun Devils your first listen of the day. And as always, once again, thank you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.